So the next question pertains more to the pharmaceutical supply chain. This is something you and I also have talked about before, because the pharmaceutical supply chain is very global, it's very diverse, and we rely very significantly on each other in terms of many of the medications, because we know we have other health conditions, numerous other medications that the pharmaceutical supply chain needs to be suited to provide. But do you think that the pharmaceutical supply chain is ready to meet such a huge demand? And do you think that the vaccination distribution process is actually going to impact, will it impact the pharmaceutical supply chain, or are they ready, do you think?
Well, and we've seen drug shortages as a recurring issue, an ongoing issue, even before the pandemic started, and largely because you're seeing such a dependency on global supply chain issues and less domestic control over the manufacturing process and even policies. So with the margin erosion and deflationary pressures on the cost of goods of the manufacturers, particularly in low-cost jurisdictions like Canada and New Zealand and other jurisdictions internationally, that's caused a lot of outsourcing for the active product ingredients. You're seeing a lot of that done in China and India. And with foreign site inspections, it closed down some of these factories and other supply chain interruptions, including shortage of the APIs. We've seen an increase in drug shortages. Then you have other recalls and shortages for a variety of different reasons. So that then became exasperated with respect to the pandemic. In early March, you had stockpiling happening, and we saw a real strain on the supply chain. So in the Canadian context, most of the provinces went to a 30-day limit of medications to try to manage that and prevent a drug shortage. And I think in large part, it worked, but there still was some drug shortages. So now you add on to this complexity of the vaccine and just the sheer volume and undertaking that this is going to require. I think we're ready. I do think particularly in the pharmacy space, because we have a very sophisticated pharmacy-led distribution system, and the pharmacy wholesalers have been preparing for this for some time. Obviously there's a lot of advanced preparation that's going into this to prepare for the different surges in demand. But it is a good call out. And I think this is part of what we need to do, is make sure we have that surveillance and monitoring, particularly around data and IT, but also looking at it from the perspective of monitoring drug shortages, because what we don't want to do is introduce risk and continuity of care for patients where, on the one hand, we have supply going out the door for vaccines, and then we introduce some risks around medication management within the community. But I think that's a low risk at this stage. We've been doing vaccinations for some time, maybe not at this volume and magnitude, but for pharmacists to be able to manage this within the supply chain, and then bringing in resources like the military, who are logistic specialists, to be able to coordinate this, because that's really what it's going to take. It's a degree of coordination between multiple levels of government, multiple stakeholders in the healthcare community, and leveraging all of the assets that we have to make it efficient. So inevitably there'll be some challenges. We're certainly not have our head in the sand or naive about that. I think because we've never been through this before, we'll have some certainly lessons to learn from it, but we're certainly ready. And I think one of the value that propositions of pharmacy is that we have traditionally shown that we have better numbers when it comes to the ROI of distribution through pharmacy, less spoilage of vaccines and influenza and other vaccines and immunizations, as well as less wastage. Our wastage levels of the flu vaccine are less than 6%. And in other parts of the system, it's in excess of 12%. So, that's going to be important too, because of the cost and other elements that we need to protect. We need to make sure that we do this in the most sophisticated way as possible.
Thank you for shedding a little bit more light too on the pharmaceutical supply chain for those that are listening, with regards to what it looked like kind of pre-COVID and then what we can anticipate. I think for a lot of pharmacists or those within the pharmacy space, we recognize the limitations and vulnerabilities of the supply chain. So it is very assuring to get the get your perspectives on that, the fact that we are really working to ensure that that the supply chain is more resilient for this. I also think that your point about also tracking those drug shortages to see the difference of is it truly impacted, I think will be very beneficial for a lot of institutions, right? What will it look like? Because there are still a lot of institutions that don't formally track their drug shortages. They take care of them as they go wrong. But I think that's a great point too, because we're going to start talking also about different outcome metrics later, and that'll be interesting to see your thoughts on that.